Hello. So let's go through an explanation of HTML and CSS. Just very quickly, a few points to make before I dig straight into the code. HTML, hypertext markup language. Now this is where we actually deal with the structure of the content. So we're actually going to build a page, a simple page, but we have to think about the structure of the content. That's what we're starting from. That's our starting point. Now, one thing just to bear in mind is that hypertext is the important part of the HTML, because really that was really why it was invented in the first place, enabling us to link from one document to the other, or indeed to link from one part of one document into the same document. Hypertext is the most important and fundamental aspect of when we're actually browsing a website. The other thing is that that's HTML, structure. Bear that in mind as I start to work through this. The other thing is that CSS, which is the what we refer to as the cascading style sheets, this is where we deal with the appearance and the style. In other words, the look of the page. That's what we're actually dealing with when we're dealing with the CSS. So we need to now build a very simple HTML document where we're actually thinking about the structure, and then what we need to do is to apply our styles to those elements on the page. So let's get to it then, and we're going to now use something called VSCODE or Visual Studio Code, and hopefully you've already installed this so you can play along with me if you like and have a look how you can actually do this. Visual Studio Code actually helps us to write the code. It makes life a lot easier if we've got that installed. Okay, thank you. Okay, so there's just a few things just to bear in mind. Now, as you can see, I've now got my my Mac Finder open. I'm just simply looking at an empty space on my desktop here. But just a couple of things. I've got my Visual Studio Code installed, and I'm hoping that you've already got that sorted out. So you do look at the video about how to install it. If you haven't got to that stage. But the other thing is that I've got my VS Code icon on my dock, and you'll see in a moment why that actually helps, but it doesn't. You can do it all sorts of different ways. Now, again, there's lots of different ways that we can do this. We could just open Visual Studio Code and start from there, but what I find is easier actually is to create a project folder. And I'm going to do that in this space here. So I'm making a folder and I'm just going to call it website. So there's a folder there. Now I'm going to dig into that folder and I'm going to create two more folders inside this. So first of all, I'm going to create a folder called CSS. And then I'm going to create another folder called images, because needless to say, that's what I'm going to make use of. Now, having created that structure, I'm now just simply going to drag that folder down onto my code icon. And what you'll see happens now is that this will actually, well, it's going to ask me some questions, which I just want to click my go ahead button. And you can see that what we've actually got on the left-hand side here, this is my project space. So you can see that I've got website and I've got my two folders here. Ready to start working. And then we need, the first thing we need to do then is in this space here is to create a file. So you can see here we've got these icons here, and that one I'm going to use there, new file, and I'm going to create something called index.html. Now that's very important that it has the extension .html so that VS Code knows that it's an HTML document, and also that it's called index for the very reason that in an index file within a folder is the default home page for that folder. So if we were to open this folder in a browser, that's what will actually load up. Now, of course, there's nothing in it right now. Now, VS Code is very helpful at sort of completing the various tasks. Now, you'll see what I'm going to do now is just is very simply going to create an HTML document. And the first thing I'm going to type is HTML. And then I'm going to, and then this is something that VS Code will help us with. We could write the complete tag here, but actually if we use the tab key, I'm going to hit the tab key, and as you can see, it automatically completes that structure. So opening HTML, closing HTML. So the way that we close a tag, as you can see, is with that slash in there. So you're basically looking at two things that are almost identical, except that that's the one that closes it. So this is a system of tagging. But what we need to do now is to add some other elements. Now within our HTML, we've got two really important elements. And the first one I'm going to put in here is head. And again, it will complete it for us. I'll come back into the head in a moment. But the next thing we need to do is to put in a body, which of course naturally occurs underneath the head. So here we have the head and here we have the body. Now, important thing about the body is that everything that's inside the body is what will show on our web page. So when you're looking at a web page, actually, all of the stuff that you see is actually coming from within the body. We don't see anything from within the head tag, but there are some things that we need to put in there. For example, we need to put in the title of our web page. So the title of our web page is going to be, in my case, I'm going to use my Shakespeare homepage. So I'm going to put in here my Midsummer Night's Dream. This is the title of my page. Okay, so as you can see, the white text is the content. The red is, of course, just simply the tagging. Okay, now that's really just the beginnings of it. Now, the way that we talk about this is that it's a hierarchical system. I should get that word right. A hierarchical system where one thing is nested inside another, and inside that might be nested something else. So what we've got then at the moment is the grandparent, if you like, of all of this is the HTML tag. So think of that as like the box. Inside that we've got two boxes. We've got the head tag and we've got the body tag. So the head and the body are siblings, if you like. They are at the same level. But a child of the head tag right now is the title tag. Okay, so now what we're going to do is to add some further elements inside the body tag. And the first thing I'm going to do, and I should explain that we tend to use semantic tags that actually mean something, that makes sense, if you like, in terms of the structure. So the one thing that I'm going to put at the top of my page is a header. So there's my header. So we'll just leave that empty for the moment. And then underneath the header, we're going to have all the block of information that is below the header. So the header is like where we put title the page. We're going to have the title of our play here, maybe. But what I'm going to do in this after that is I'm going to put in a block which I'm going to call main. So when I'm saying I'm going to call it, it is the standard way of structuring our page. Okay, so we've got body and then header and main. Now what we could do, we can also have what we call a footer. So we would say, we've got a header, so therefore we're going to have a footer. I'm sure you're familiar with these terms when you're looking at print. When you're doing your essays or whatever, you've got your header text, might be the title of your document, and then you've got your footer, which is going to include your page numbers and stuff like this. So that's the main structure of it. And now what we need to do really, well, just think about that for the moment. I'm just going to actually save this. Okay, now as you can see, when you save something, one of the other things that Visual Studio does is it actually tidies things up for you. Well, actually, this is to do with the fact that we've actually installed the extension called Prettier. And that actually does this business of making things look much better. Now, obviously, I am going to still want some space in here because I've got to put something in here and I've got to put something in here and eventually I want to put something in here. For example, the footer might just simply say copyright and then to the date, 2022. But inside the header, we're going to probably have the heading for the page. So we're going to now use a heading tag, and I'm going to use H1. We've actually got the ability to use between H1 and H6 as the different levels of heading. So H1 is going to have the title of my page, which in this case again is A Midsummer Night's Dream. I should just explain to you the difference between these two places where I'm using my title. This title in here in the head tag is not the one that's going to show on the page. That's the one that would show on our little tab bar at the top in our browser. If we're using Google Chrome or Safari, you know, you get that little message at the top in the bar. Also, when we actually use Google to search for our content on the web, that's what will appear in the search results. Because it extracts that information from the title. So if you like, it's sort of part of the metadata for this document, the metadata being information about this document, and that's one of the things that we will need there. Now I'm just going to leave the header as it is, and now what I need to do for my main part here is I'm going to have some content. I'm going to have, for example, a picture, and I'm going to have some text. Now, pictures, for our picture, we actually use something called the image tag or the IMG tag. But what I'm going to do, again, because I want to sort of build up a kind of like scaffolding, if you like, for my content, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into, again, a semantic tag called figure. Which, of course, again, I'm sure you're used to this expression. When you're dealing with book publishing, you know what I mean by that. So in the figure, within the figure block, I'm going to put my image. And then after the image, I'm going to have some content, which is mostly going to be text. Well, it's going to be text content. And in here, so again, here's my scaffolding that I'm going to build for this. And I'm going to actually put a section in here. So the section is there, like so. And that's essentially ready now to accept some content. Let's actually now go into the figure and add our image tag. Now, the way that the image tag works is a slightly unique one because we are only going to use attributes to tell it where to find the image. And we haven't put the image in yet, so we will need to do that as well. We haven't got an image available to us yet, but I'll come on to that in a second. So the way that we work on the image tag is we just type IMG, that is the tag, not image, but IMG, and then I can hit tab, and it will fill in, it will give us the spaces for us to put the content in. Now, as you can see, it's got inverted commas and quotation marks, I should say, for the source, and at the moment that's empty. So what I need to do now is to put that image, I'll put an image available to us, and guess what? I'm going to put it into the images folder. So let's now just go back temporarily to our Finder and go into here. And I'm going into my images folder, but what I'm actually looking for is the image that I'm going to use. So the image that I'm going to use actually is my cover for that I've previously used in my work in print publication. So I'm going to get a copy of that. I just need to remember where I've actually put it. Well, this one will do. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go back to my structure again. Here we are. Now I'm going to paste it into here. So this space here, I'm going to paste that item into there. So there's my cover. And now if I go back to VS Code, you should see that image inside here. In fact, if we click on it, VS Code does display the image for us as well. So you can see that that's already in there. So if I now go to my go back to my index file, I need to therefore put a reference to it in that source. Now, the important thing here is it needs to know the path to it. So that's one of the reasons why we've constructed this structure where we've got the overall project is a folder, and then inside that folder is another folder, and then inside there is our image. So this actually here is where the image is. So if I right click over that, you can actually copy the relative path to it. That's a handy way of making sure that you then put into there, and I'm going to paste that in. You paste that in and you can see it actually builds the path to it. So you've got to think about this structure. We are currently in a folder called website. We're looking down into the folder called images, and then inside that there is our image. And we've got to make sure that we use, now one of the things that just to point out to you, it's really critical that you use exactly the right naming for everything that you refer to like this. If we were to put in, say, a capital C for cover, in that name for the JPEG, then it wouldn't work. It's not forgiving. It won't allow you to have uppercase characters in one place and lowercase in another. So make sure that you're naming it correctly. Now, the alt tag. Now, what does the alt tag mean? Well, alt is short for alternative. And in here, we need to put a description of the image. So that, and the reason for this is that this is to do with accessibility for anybody that wants to come and view our website. And that word view is the important thing here. We might not be able to view it because we might have some visual impairment, or we might just want to get some piece of software to read the content out to us because we can't actually look at it. And if we use a screen reader, as it's called, then that screen reader needs to go through and look at the image and say, well, what actually is it? How can I describe it to somebody? So in here we put a description of it. So I'm going to say a cover image showing Titania and bottom in the play. I mean, obviously I can make it even longer, but that'll do for the moment. And that's our image tag. Now, that's inside the figure. Let's actually, before we even look at this in a web browser, let's just add some other content. And I'm just going to now, in my section, I'm going to now add a couple of paragraphs. And the way that paragraphs work is we just use the P tag. There's the P tag. And in here, I'm just going to add some random text. And Visual Studio Code is helpful for us here when we're actually just doing a sort of test run, if you like, to see how our website looks. We can use something called lorem ipsum text, which is, of course, it's just random text. So if I actually type lorem here and then hit the tab key, you'll see it adds some random text for us. And I'm going to make 2 paragraphs here. Let's actually just do for another paragraph, and again in there I shall just do another lorem ipsum. So we've now got 2 paragraphs inside our section. As you can see, the paragraphs have an opening and a closing tag. You can see that, and I'm now going to save it, and this will actually then tidy things up for us again. And the way that it tidies it up, as you can see, is it actually indents things. It also helps you because you can see these lines indicate the opening and the closing of tags. Do you see that? So you can actually see how the main works and how the image tag works. So it actually does help us identify the overall structure of our site. Now having saved that, I'm now going to actually look at this. Now, one of the things that I've added to my VSCODE application, I've added an extension called Go Live. And what Go Live does is it actually runs a little web server on my computer so that it will automatically update the content in a browser. So you can see that down here, and I'm going to click on Go Live. It's starting that up, and now here is my page. I'm just going to bring it over here so that we've got both things running at the same time. And I'm basically just going to drag this over here so we can actually now view these things together. Okay, now obviously what we've got is we've got our basic page like this. And as you can see, we have got the content. It's just very ugly at the moment because the image is far too big. But also the text does differentiate between the heading. So the H1 is large. The paragraphs are much smaller, but obviously we now need to make some adjustments with the style. So you have to understand that when we create an HTML document, it will work, of course, and you will get certain default settings. For example, you can see that the 2 paragraphs that I've got here are separated. There is a margin between them, and that's nothing to do with this space here. This space is totally irrelevant. We can actually have lots of space, making it look a bit untidy, and this won't make any difference here. That doesn't make any difference whatsoever. So space that is not within the tags does not get displayed in our web browser. That's the important thing. It's only things that are inside the tags that are being displayed, or in fact being styled when we come to work on the CSS in a moment. And there's just one other thing before I start to work on the styles. One other thing that I want to add to this. Within my section, I also wanted just to show you another important element, and that's the list element. The idea of actually producing a list of items, and I'm going to make what we call an unordered list. In other words, this is, as you will see in a moment, going to become a bulleted list. And the way that we do this is we use the UL tag, like so. And then inside the unordered list, we need list items. So here are our list items. So I'm going to put in one there, and I'm going to put in something here. So let's actually say, I don't know, let's say first performed or something like that. Let's make sure we get the spelling right. I'm just guessing now. First, I've just got to get the spelling right, and then we'll have another list item in here, and this time we'll actually say first printed. What should we say? I don't know, 1700 or something like that. Let's just actually make it consistent. Let's actually save it, and as you can see now, we've got our bulleted list down here, automatically delivered on the page. The unordered list gives us our bullets, whereas OL, which is ordered list, guess what? That will give us a numbered list. There we are, 1 and 2. So that's the unordered list and the ordered list. Now there are lots of other HTML elements that we could play around with, but we'll just set that back to unordered list again. Just want to keep it as bulleted list, like so, and that's it. So really, in a way, we're now done for the moment. We're done with our HTML. We've got our basic content in here. What we now need to do is to actually use styles to make some adjustment to this. Now the thing about CSS is that we can apply the CSS in a number of different ways. It is actually possible technically to add the style into the actual HTML. Now we don't recommend this, and I'll explain to you why, but I will just demonstrate it to you anyway. For example, let's just look at our H1, our top level heading, which is right up at the top here. It is technically possible, as I say, to add style directly into the HTML. So, for example, the way that we can do this is to write style equals, and then close the, and then have inverted commas. Now, we can actually put in, let's just put in something really simple like color. Color was the American way of spelling it. And I'm just going to put in color red like this. Okay, so there we are. As you can see, I've added color into this directly as an attribute of the H1. You see how it works there? H1, so that is the beginning of our H1 tag, but it's got an attribute called style, and then we've put some parameters in there. Now, the reason that we don't do it like this normally is because it makes it very difficult to have a complete website that's consistent, because you're constantly having to adjust in each HTML page rather than the whole website. The way that we normally work is to have an external CSS file, a file that is external to the HTML, and then we link to it. And we do that because then we can link to lots of HTML documents to the same CSS document. So let's actually take that out of here. There we are. We've taken that out. I'm going to save it and it will go back to normal. So what we now need to do then is to create inside our CSS folder. I'm going to create a CSS document, which of course will currently be empty. So inside that folder, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this styles.css. Now again, it's important that you have the extension .css, because then VS Code will recognize it as a CSS file and give us our color coding and our sort of tidy look, because it knows that it's a CSS file. So that's our CSS file, and this is empty right now, so I'm going to put some styling into here. Now the first thing is that This is the way that it works, and I'm going to just very simply start off with the body tag. So remember, the whole of the body is where all of our content sits. So I actually can type in here body, and then what I need to do is to put in my curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets then will be where we have our style definitions. So I'm going to just do something very, very simple to begin with, because we can see the result straight away, and that is that I'm going to put in a background color. So I start typing background and it automatically comes up, and I'm going to put in here a color, I don't know, let's go for a bisque, which is a sort of slightly, you know, yellowy ochre color, and save it. And now you should see that that's now given us that color. It's actually not very sensible, because it doesn't work at all. So we're not getting anything. Now, why is that? We're not getting anything at all because we haven't linked. The HTML document doesn't know anything about this CSS file. So what we have to do is to go back into our HTML and make a link to this CSS file, and we do this in the head tag. Now you can put it either after the title or before, it doesn't really matter. This is where we put it. So I'm going to type again, VSCODE is helpful to us. We just type link, tab. Now all it's asking us for is the reference to it. This is the way that it works. It's got to be telling us that it's what kind of relationship is it, REL, what relationship is it? It's a style sheet. And where is it? Okay, where is the reference? Where is the hypertext reference to it? And we need to put that in quotation marks there. And like we did before with our images, with our image, we can do the same thing again. We can just simply right click over that document and copy the relative path. Then when we put that into there, paste it into there, then we should see css/styles.css. In other words, where is it in relation to where we are? The relationship is inside the CSS folder, and there's the named CSS document. So I'm now saving that, and you should see therefore instantly the document changes its background color because it's found that. Okay, let's carry on then. Let's do some more work on our style sheet. Now, remember that what we've got inside the body is we have something called main inside the body. That's covering most of our content. And what I can do in main is just, again, it's the same method. We go to main, we type in our opening curly bracket, and then we start writing our content or our style definitions in here. And the first thing I'm going to do, just because I like to be able to sort of understand what I'm looking at and it helps you see where is this box called main, I'm going to just put in border. I'm going to use a border of, say, 2 pixels wide, so it's quite a thick border. It's going to be solid. I mean, it could be dotted, but I'm just going to go for solid, and I'm going to make it red, like so. Okay, and now as you see, when I save it, then you see we've got this box. Can you just see that? Now the image itself is actually flowing right outside the box because it's actually far too big to show on the page right now. But remember that the image that's actually here is actually sitting in something called, it's sitting inside something called figure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for figure as well. And in this case, again, just so that we can see where it is, I'm going to start off by giving it a border of 1 pixel, solid green. Now we don't want borders necessarily, it's just that we can, it's just to start us off. You can actually now just see, although you can hardly see it, but you can just see that we've got our figure there inside there. Now, what we need to do though is we need to tell our image to only be as wide as the figure. So the figure is the sort of containing box, but because the image is far too big, it's just showing it as it really is. In other words, I can't remember, it's more than 1,000 pixels wide if I remember correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my image tag now, and my image tag, what I'm going to do with my image tag initially, I'm just going to make the width of it So I've got width, and I'm going to say only make me 100% wide. Now, percentage is an important unit of measure because it's actually refers to the parent. In other words, it's 100% of the parent. In fact, what I'm going to do, because it would be easier to demonstrate it, I suppose, I'm going to go for 50%. So 50% is the width, is 50% of the figure box. So we've got this box, and whatever the width of that is, because it's determined by the width of my page. Actually, you can see that it's actually only just, well, it doesn't matter. You'll see what I mean in a second. But the width of this now is going to be 50% of that. So let's actually save that and see what happens. Yeah, there we are. Now it's only 50% of the box. Now you can see a little bit more, it makes it a little bit more visible now. We can actually see what's going on. We've got a red box, which is the main. Then we've got inside that another box called figure. And inside that is our image, which is only 50%. Now I'm going to go back to making this 100%, like so. And now it actually goes right out to the width of that. But what of course I can do is I can go back to my figure, which is the containing box, and actually make this a percentage. And I'm going to give this a width of, let's say 70%, like so. Now 70% is, we're talking about 70% of the width of the main. So because it's nested inside main, the width refers to the width of what? 70% of what? 70% of the main box. Now, just a word or two about what we're actually looking at on the screen at the moment. Now notice that I always put a semicolon at the end of each line. That's very important in the syntax for CSS. CSS needs to know that it's a list of items that you're actually listing out the attributes or the style rules for that particular element. So in our figure, we've got a border of green, and then we have a semicolon to say, carry on, there's something else to come. There's a new one here, another line here, width of 70%. If I didn't have the semicolon at the end of my first line, it would stop there and not carry on. So it's always important to make sure that you do that. So anyway, so let's save that and now go back to here, and you should see now that what we've actually got is the figure is actually 70% of the main, whereas the image is actually filling up that space inside the figure box. The image is 100% of that. Okay, so that's what we've got to begin with. Now, what about if we want to actually center this whole thing? What about if we want to center the figure inside the main? How do we go about doing that? Well, maybe we haven't talked about this at all yet. We haven't talked about margins and borders and margins and padding. Margins and paddings are an important concept. When we talk about margin, we mean the space around the box and how it relates to the things around it. So at the moment, this image is 100% of the width of the figure. But what we could do in the figure is we could actually have some padding inside it. So let's actually just do that. So I'm going to put padding of, say, 20 pixels inside that. Now, as you can see, it puts padding inside the box. So the box called figure has got padding inside it now. So it's actually forcing our image inside it to only go up against that padding. It won't go inside the padding space. And so we've only got, although it's 70%, it won't go inside that padding space. So that's what we mean by padding. Whereas margin is on the outside. Margin is on the outside. So there is a margin around the objects by default. But what we can do with our with our figure is actually we can put a margin around it. And the way that we can do that, again, is rather similar to the padding. We can actually just give it one number, or what we can do is to go round the clock and say we want something at the top, something at the right, something at the bottom, something at the left. So if I say, for example, I don't want a margin at the top, But what I want on the right and on the left is the same. I want the same on both sides so that we can actually get this into the center. So the way that we do that is, rather than using a number, we use the term auto. Now, by putting in two attributes here, 0 and auto, we're actually effectively putting in 4. It would be the same. Let me actually write it out in longhand just so that you can actually understand. That is actually what we need. We want 0 at the top, auto on the right, 0 on the bottom, auto on the left. So we're going round the clock. But you can use the shortcut of just putting in 2 items, and then it automatically presumes that you're going to repeat that again. So that if you only put 2 in, it presumes that you mean around everywhere. Okay, let's actually save that now. Like so. And go back to here, and now it's put that into the middle. So that figure is now in the middle of our right in the middle of our main box. Now our main box, as you can see, goes all the way out to the edges of the body, although not quite, and that's because body by default also has a margin. So there's always going to be a margin on the body unless you actually remove it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to remove the margin on the body. So I can put the margin of 0, and now what you'll see will happen is our main will go right the way to the edge, like that. Which is not particularly good for the moment, but I wanted to do that just to show you that, that our body, already by default has that margin, and we might want to remove it, which is what I've now done. Okay, now let's actually focus on the main box for the moment. What we can do with our main is we can actually give this a width, again, a percentage, so that this will only be, a certain width. We don't want it to go all the way out to the edge. Let's actually do that. So again, we can use a percentage, and in this case, I'm going to go for 70%. Okay. Okay, so there we are. We've got that now sitting. Now, by default, you should understand that by default, things are always left aligned. Everything is left aligned unless you tell it otherwise. So again, once again, we've got now this situation where we've got our main box is left aligned, and what we actually want is we want this to be in the center. So we can do exactly the same thing as we did before. And I'm just going to copy that and put that into here. Now we have got, to a certain extent, a little bit of responsiveness to our web page now, because as you can see, as I increase the size or decrease the size, then the percentage is obviously changing the width of these items. But to a certain extent, well, not to a certain extent for sure, we don't want this to actually go too big, because as you can see, it's not very nice if we see our text going out very, very long on a cinema display, on a big display like this. We're actually not going to be very happy if our text becomes very, very wide. So what we want to do, therefore, is we want to restrict it to a certain width. We don't want it to go over a certain width. So percentages are very good initially to help us, but we don't want to go too big. We probably don't want to go too small either, but we'll come on to that later. So what we can do, therefore, is we can use something called maximum width or max width. So max width, and we then need to put in a particular percentage, a particular pixel value in here. I'm going to put in a pixel value. I'm going to guess that we don't want this to go above 800 pixels. So in other words, we are happy with the percentage change, but we don't want it to go above a certain size. And now if you see what happens as we increase, it should stop. Okay, so it won't go any bigger than that. I probably can reduce that down to make it a little bit more obvious. So let's go for 500. Okay, and then it stops. So it shrinks and then it stops, like that. Okay, let's just do something to our heading. I'm going to do that up here. So H1, I'm going to actually make this text align to center. So there we have that. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to do, I've got this nice color for my background, but what I want to do is to have my actual main content, I'm going to make that white, so that I've actually got then my, it's a lot more readable. All of my content is a lot more readable, like that. But then what I want to do is want to make sure that all of my content is not crashing up against the edge. So as you can see, my text is going right up against the left edge of our main box. So what I want to do in my, and therefore for main, well, there are two ways of doing it. I can either very specifically look at my paragraphs and actually add a margin in my paragraphs, but it might be another way of doing it, or a sensible way of doing it, is to add some padding into. Now padding, remember, is inside the box. So for my padding here, I want to go for a padding all the way round, I think. So I'm going to go for, say, let's go for, I'm going to deal with pixel values for the moment because we're not going to talk too much about units of measure. Now you can see that I've got this space around so it's not crashing up against the edge. And I think what we'll actually do is to remove our border now. We can actually just temporarily remove our border. In other words, we can tell the CSS that this is something that a line that we're going to skip for the moment. And the way that we can do that is to put in, if we go to command backslash, like that, when we're in that line, you can see it adds this slash asterisk asterisk slash around that content, and it goes grey, meaning it's going to be ignored. So now we've got rid of that. Well, we can leave it like that for the moment. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at our text, and we're going to think about how we might want to make adjustments to the typeface that we're using. Now, once again, we can think about the hierarchy here. If we set the, say, for example, the typeface that we want to use for the whole of our body, we can do that in the body tag here, and we use something called the font family. Now, let me explain about the font family. The way the font family works, and I'm going to actually, for this, I'm going to use Cambria. But this becomes, we actually get a list of a comma delimited list of possible typefaces to use. And the reason for this is that not every computer has the same typeface installed. So if we have a computer, if we're looking at this website with a browser and this computer doesn't have Cambria on it, which is our first choice, it will then revert to the next available option, and if it doesn't have that, it will then go to the next available option, and so on, until eventually, if it hasn't got any of these because somebody's removed all of the fonts for some strange reason, it will just go to whatever the default serif font is on this computer. So it's if you like, a sort of a list of ever diminishing options, and I'm just going to save that, and we should now see that our site now changes to using this wonderful Cambria here, like so. Okay, so that's for everything. But then, say for example, we don't really want our Midsummer Night's Dream title to be like that. We might want to use a different typeface for that. So then we can actually override that in here and say that we want a different typeface. So let's actually use something like a more of a sans serif font. So I'm using Verdana for that, and if we now save it, you see that's coming up there different for the top. We can do some other things with our text. We can, for example, put a background color for this. So I'm going to go for background color, and I'm going to make this, let's go for a chocolate color, so called. Colors can be, of course, named colors, or if you prefer, you can actually just choose the color that you want, like so. And then what I'm going to do is to change the actual color of the text to be white. So we want to always produce, a good contrast for our colors here. And then what we can do is to sort of give that bar at the top a little bit more space, and we can do that by giving it, by making sure that our header, which is what we've got in here, let's do something with our header so that we can identify it. So I'm going to actually use a border on this as well, just so that we can actually see where it is. Okay, so as you can see, that's a lot bigger, and that's something that's something that we need to address. So what I'm going to do is to change this now slightly. So I'm going to take that out of there and put it into our header. So our background color is now that. Okay, so that's the beginnings then, and for the next part I'm going to explore this in a little bit more detail, and we're going to look at how we can make sure that we have something that's responsive, a little bit more responsive, so that it actually displays better when we look at this on a mobile phone. So that will be our next step.